What is the worst legendary Pokemon by WolfeyVGC?
Legendary Pokemon are supposed to be, well, legendary, and most of them really do live up to the hype, but not all of them. Some legendary Pokemon are only legendary for how unbelievably terrible they are. And that got me thinking, what is the worst legendary Pokemon of all time? Well, in order to figure that out, I would obviously need to find the contenders. So I decided to make this video, which will certainly not lead to a single rage-filled YouTube comment talking about how I don't know what I'm talking about and their favorite legendary is actually really good and I just don't believe in it enough to see it. If your favorite legendary is on this list and you are thinking about writing an angry YouTube comment, please just keep in mind that I'm talking strictly about competitive Pokemon here.
Right.
I love a lot of the legendaries on this list, but that doesn't redeem them in the eyes of the gods of Pokemon tournaments. On that note, I'm not going to talk about any not fully evolved legendaries or legendaries that are strictly worse versions of their true forms. And that's because I love Nebby and I would never say anything bad about it. Also, I'm not going to talk about any mythical Pokemon because they're never legal in official competitive tournaments.
That was actually going to be my next question. Are we talking about mythical Pokemon or I guess event Pokemon as they're known? Because, I mean, that would have been like Fione, right? Fione probably would have been like, someone's going to be like, Kip, what's Fione? And they're going to be like, oh yeah, the Manaphy egg thing. Yeah. Because you Manaphy, you breed the Manaphy, and then you get Fione, and it never evolves into Manaphy. There's going to be people who forgot Fione existed, right? Like, I think that would have been just the easy answer. In terms of legendary, my money's on something like Mewtwo or Lugia, if I'm being completely honest. Sure, Lugia is the Great Wall, but we do have things like Bacon Bird, right? I think we just have better options now. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what his educated take on what the worst legendary Pokemon is.
You're safe for now, Melton. Melton sounds like what I do to my grilled cheese. But you know who isn't safe? Moltres. Coming in at number 8, which is technically the best of the bad Pokemon, Moltres is still, well, not great. I'm talking about exclusively Kanto Moltres here, by the way. Galarian Moltres is my homie. But what makes Kanto Moltres so much worse? In a word, the typing. Fire and Flying is just not very good, despite there being several good Fire and Flying type Pokemon trying very hard to prove me wrong. Both types being weak to Rock, in addition to being weak to common types Water and Electric, is just too much to offset the actual pretty good defensive spread. Just like how putting Super Gourmet homegrown tomatoes isn't enough to save a salad when the lettuce is a couple years old. Also, it doesn't help that neither fire or flying moves can hit rock types for even neutral damage, compounding Moltres' Stony Sorrows. That could be a band name, actually. The Stony Sorrows? Moltres' typing isn't its only issue, though. The stats aren't doing it any favors. It's not even that they're bad, it's more like they just aren't doing any one thing well enough to be worth using. Moltres has a middling speed stat, pretty good bulk, and an okay special attack stat. But doing a bunch of things just okay is not as useful as doing a couple things really well. Right. At least that's what I tell myself when I remember that instead of knowing actually, useful skills, I am instead the best at a video game marketed towards children. But unlike my Pokemon skills, there's nothing exceptional about Moltres' stats. Something unfortunately true for the flaming chicken across the board. Many Pokemon with okay typing and stats are saved by their abilities. And that's actually the case for some of the other Fire and Flying type Pokemon. Unfortunately, out of all the Pokemon of its type, Moltres has the worst abilities. It gets Pressure, an ability that's borderline useless as all it does is drain your opponent's PP by one more than normal, and its hidden ability isn't great either. It's Flame Body, providing a chance to burn whenever a Pokemon makes contact with Moltres. And to be clear, this is a good ability. Burning physical attackers is super valuable, but compared to Solar Power, Drought, or Gale Wings, it's a lot worse, especially when we consider, again, that Moltres' typing makes keeping it alive, not the easiest mission in the game. Galarian Moltres gets a signature move called Fiery Wrath, which is actually quite good. But Kanto Moltres has no such equivalent. While the moves it learns are overall solid, it doesn't have a good signature attack. And while it does learn all the regular fire and flying moves you'd expect, there's nothing exceptional in its kit, which is kind of the whole story here, isn't it? Despite everything stacked against it, Moltres has seen some usage over the years, mostly on rain teams. Its move Hurricane is quite powerful in the rain, and teams built around rain struggle to use fire types normally given how bad the weather is for them. So
I see that false swipe gaming credit in the bottom left. Yeah, false swipe gaming enjoyer.
Moltres could fill a niche. Moltres even placed as high as 4th at an international level tournament back in 2019, when powerful restricted Pokemon were legal, using Hurricane to hit the grass types that resisted its partner Kyogre, Burn Up to turn off its fire typing, Tailwind to support its teammates, and Roar to get rid of Xerneas, whose fairy moves it resists. The player
I mean, I kind of dig it, though. That's actually really hyper support. I kind of dig it because you're able to operate under rain, but if for some reason they bring in like a Torkoal or like Groudon or something with drought, right? I mean, you're going to be able to like fire off potential heat waves, right? I actually really like it. I think that's really cute.
who used Moltres was the reigning world champion at the time. So while not great, Moltres also wasn't that bad, at least at one point in time.
Right.
And honestly, the same can kind of be said for our number 7 slot.
Before we move to our number 7 slot, because I'm kind of trying to go through section by section, kind of provide analysis, getting the complete point across. I actually really like that he has transitional bits in here. So Moltres being fire flying is going to be a very aggressive typing for all intents and purposes, right? That's like Weavile having like dark and ice, right? Like it's a hyper aggressive typing. The issue with its abilities is that its abilities kind of rely on defensive, right? Being defensive, where you have pressure, which is your opponent uses one more PP, one more, move currency, right? Per move that they use. Sure, if you're trying to, stall your opponent out or recover something like that, sure, something that makes a little bit of sense. And the other one, which was Flame Body, right? On contact, chance to burn, right? Like, sure, that requires you getting hit, though. It's no solar power. It's nothing that actually like buffs you, right? It's no guts, it's no sheer force, right? Anything like that. So inherently, you're running into an issue where Moltres is trying to do too many things, and its stat block also, as I said, kind of betrays that as well. Where like its stat blocks and move pool, like you kind of have things in a general sense, but you don't really have a thing or couple of things that you do very well. It's kind of reminiscent, if not invocative, of Charizard to a degree, where Charizard is also a Gen 1 fire flying. Charizard has a great stat block, don't get me wrong, but I feel like Charizard, especially going into like Fire Leaf Green Gen 3, it felt like kind of like a Swiss Army knife in some capacity, right? Like you have things like Wing Attack and Fly, you have things like Metal Claw, you have your fire moves like Fire Blast, Flamethrower, etc. Like you can kind of do things. You definitely feel like you're more of a utility Pokemon. It's really interesting to look at Moltres. I know Moltres has seen more and more play in legacy formats as time goes on, because people still play legacy formats. People still play RBYGSC, RSE, right? Like people still play legacy formats. So it's interesting to see how Moltres has evolved over time and how it kind of waxes and wanes in favor. And even being able to just look back at retro legacy formats and being able to make certain use cases there. I think that the weakness to rock is definitely a problem. Things like Tyranitar are just pretty prominent in VGC in a lot of ways, especially when you have like Tyranitar Excadrill, right? Sandstream, Sandrush kind of being a very popular combo. You do have things like Rock Slide, which are, because it's a spread move, and a lot of things get Rock Slide. I mean, that is going to pose a problem, especially at a 4X. It's the same thing we talk about, where if you're weak to ground, how do you justify you being weak to ground? Like, what do you add to the team? Oh, you're just mediocre. You're strictly just a less good option. You're not really worth the team slot at that point. Being weak to both bulky water types, as well as rock types. I mean, or electric types as well, right? I mean, things like Kyogre, right? Get immediate setup Thunder. If your Kyogre goes untested and sets that Drizzle, right? Or if your Pelipper sets Drizzle and something has Thunder, right? It's going to hurt Moltres. It's going to 2x it, and it's gonna hurt, especially because like it's pretty mid at everything else it does. Going into water types, I mean, bulky water types like Suicune, going into certain like Walking Wake, things like that, right? Like, you really don't have good type matchups, and that definitely hurts your performance, right? If you're weak to things, like imagine, like you're bringing in Moltres, right? And your opponent has a Landorus T, right? The Landorus T is just going to click, well, it can't click Earthquake reasonably, right? But it can sure as heck click something like Stone Edge or Rock Slide. Your opponent gets, drops out a Kyogre, right? I don't know if you outspeed. Let me pull up Kyogre's stat block here really quick. We're almost done with this explanation. I wanted to make sure, as I said, I wanted to make sure that I was able to kind of consolidate my thoughts at the end. Oh, yeah, you speed tie Kyogre for all intents and purposes. I mean, your nature is going to come into it at that point. However, Kyogre does have a superior stat block, in my opinion, because it has just a base 150 special attack, right? You can invest into speed, where with Moltres, you might have to not invest in speed as heavily. So you could potentially lose that. That's also if you're not playing someone like me who just like Whimsicott, Tailwind, Pranksters, the Kyogre into the Water Spout, right? Like there's calculations that go into there, but in base, both are base 90, both they will speed tie, and it is a coin flip at that point. However, you are still fighting a bulky water type that is able to hit like an absolute Mack truck, right? So not really good matchups. Yeah, no, I agree with everything he said. I think it's interesting to look at it from that perspective.
Virizion. Now, don't get me wrong, Virizion is undoubtedly one of the worst legendary Pokemon ever made, but knowing the absolute garbage Pokemon we have coming up, I'm inclined to look at Virizion a little more favorably. Whenever I use the word inclined, I feel a little fancier, like, ooh, yes, I do feel so inclined for a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts. Thank you, my good sir.
Why when he went with the Krispy Kreme bit, why did I just think of James from Pokemon? It's because I watched the entirety of Indigo League in like the past week, like all like 80 some odd episodes. It was great. But like now I'm just like completely James pilled at this point and I'm seeing him everywhere. It's really funny.
And one thing that always makes me feel fancier is wearing my Holzkern watch, the sponsor of today's video. Holzkern's my personal favorite sponsor that we have here on this channel. I really love watches, and I've worn a Holzkern watch for most of the last 2 years. What makes Holzkern different from other companies is their use of natural materials in all their products, such as wood and stone. These are the two most recent watches Holzkern sent me, and personally, I'm a big fan. If watches aren't your thing, they have other products too, such as jewelry. I've gotten some as gifts for my loved ones before, and it always goes over really well. Speaking of, Holzkern watches make a great gift for Father's Day if you're currently looking for something. My dad loves watches, which is probably why I like them too, to be honest. Go to holzkern.com/WolfeyVGC and use code Wolfey for 15% off your purchase. Thanks again to Holzkern for sponsoring this video. What makes Virizion?
I'd give it a 9 out of 10. I want to say 8. I think 9 is where I'm going to stick, though. I'd give it a 9 out of 10. Audio is consistent. I think the transition was pretty great. I was not expecting the ad read following the little fancy bit, right? I wasn't expecting that. I mean, ad read was pretty short. It was pretty concise, to the point. Visuals made sense. Visual made sense in regards to showing scenes like from the Pokemon anime and stuff. QR code is present. That's actually kind of a thing that I like seeing now. Many people are using it. I think it's just a great visual aid. It also shows like just the product in case people are interested in it, way to get them engaged. Related to material at hand, Holzkern, Pokemon, not necessarily the first thing I think about, but I mean, he does use the product, does he not? I think the line reads fell a little flat in certain regards. Not that he needs to be, like prepare for trouble, make it double status, right? Like keeping on theme, right? Not that he needs to put an entire performance on, but it felt a little flat. I think that maybe a little more passion in it. I think that would have pushed it to a 10 out of 10. Ultimately, I think this was a very good ad read, though. I think it was a 9 out of 10.
So bad is similar to Moltres, a cocktail of issues. First, the typing. Grass and fighting is not a good combination.
Ooh.
Both types are weak to flying, and you have 5 weaknesses, though all 6 of your resistances are actually pretty high value. The thing about having a double weakness, though, is that even relatively weak moves of that type will often take a one-hit KO, making it extremely difficult to keep Virizion alive. This isn't as big a deal when a Pokemon is really frail, because more often than not, being doubly weak or singly weak to a move both result in your Pokemon doing a little disappearing act. But on a Pokemon with more bulk, double weaknesses are a huge liability. To make matters worse, grass and fighting are actually even worse offensively, with flying, bug, and poison type Pokemon resisting both types. Virizion's stats are okay, but they have a major issue. While this wireless provider is reasonably fast, which is to be expected, I guess, and its special bulk is good and physical bulk fine, the offensive stats are abysmal.
Yeah.
For a legendary Pokemon especially, this is a joke. Virizion's offensive...
I guess the expectation is that you're supposed to boost with like Swords Dance, right? Like it's supposed to balance itself out because you can hit numbers, but you need to make sure that you're boosting to it, which leads to you needing to do more actions in a single tempo than your opponent needs to do to potentially knock you out, right? Like you need to do 2 or 3 actions compared to your opponent's 1 action, especially with a quad quad weaknesses, all right? Yeah, like the fly, especially on a flying type. Do you know what's flying type? Mega Rayquaza and what is it? Dragon Ascent. Yeah, if you're weak to Dragon Ascent and Mega Rayquazas in a format, that is inherently a problem. Like, you need to have a way to solve that.
are almost identical to Girafarig. What were they thinking? It has worse offensive stats than Pincurchin. A Pincushion is stronger than a legendary Pokemon, and this is a massive deal. It's not that every Pokemon needs to be, you know, the centerpiece of the damage buffet,
right?
But every Pokemon that you bring to a battle needs to be able to contribute in some way.
Yes.
Some Pokemon that aren't supposed to be doing damage even contribute a little bit too much. Virizion doesn't have the defensive typing or the supporting move pool to work as a support Pokemon, but without being able to do damage itself, it's kind of in a no service zone. Please don't leave me. Also, please check and see if you're subscribed. My team and I work really hard on all these videos, and a lot of people watch them without ever realizing that they aren't actually subscribed. You don't have to do it right now either, but once I've earned your trust that my videos are going to be worth it, I hope you'll at least consider becoming subscribed. Virizion's ability is justified, and
let me double check. Am I subscribed? Ah, I am subscribed. I don't turn on notifications, unfortunately. However, I am subscribed.
You would be justified if you never thought about using Virizion. This ability gives Virizion an attack boost every time it's hit by a dark type move. While we've seen this ability pop off before when paired with the move Beat Up, which hits 4 times, therefore giving 4 attack boosts, Virizion's big brother Terrakion is a way better fit for this strategy with its higher attack stat and access to spread move Rock Slide. While Justified will occasionally activate on Virizion, it's not a reliable attack and often requires you to get a prediction right. In terms of moves, Virizion is like, fine. It gets some strong physical moves, but its special attacks are rough. It basically can't make use of its fighting coverage on the special side unless you like to play Pokemon like it's a carnival game. It does get setup moves like Swords Dance and Calm Mind, but with its numerous weaknesses, it's hard to actually find the time to set it up. Plus, doubling Virizion's mediocre attack stat is a lot more underwhelming than it should be. Virizion has seen some usage over the years, mostly when its specific coverage is valuable. For example, it placed second at a regional in 2018 due to its ability to hit lots of the popular Pokemon for super effective damage with Leaf Blade, Close Combat, and Stone Edge.
This is why I think that Gen 7's Pokedex was the correct way to actually balance Pokemon games, like competitive VGC formats. Because, like, obviously we had, like, Dexit. Obviously we don't have the ability to have all of the Pokemon in any of the Switch games, right? Like, which, oh my god, man, I waited so long for my Alolan Muck to come back. I just want my Alolan Muck back. I want my sassy trash pile. He's so good. Like, the way that the Sun and Moon decks worked is that you had the Alola decks, and you had things with an Alolan dex number, right? So you had things like, I don't know, Garchomp, Salamence, Incineroar, but you had things that weren't in the Alola decks, right? I can't think of any offhand, but like you only had like out of like, I think it was like 800 some odd Pokemon at the time in Gen 7, you had like only 410 approximately that were legal. So thus you run into things like Tapu's, Azumarill, right? Virizion, stuff like that. But like, so the reason why I liked that is that you did have the ability to port over things like, I don't know, like Scizor, Altaria, etc. Right? You had the ability to get all Pokemon up through that point, right? Absolutely. The issue that you run into, let me you had ability to get all the Pokemon up through that point in time, which was awesome. But only certain Pokemon were legal for Alolan Dex formats, right? So you had your regulation whatever format, and you're going to be using just the Alola Dex, or you're using Alola Dex plus whatever, right? And then eventually you just get to like full National Dex, right? Like you save those powerful formats towards the end of the life cycle of the game going into the next game, right? Like, the problem that you run into after that point is like, I feel that they had the great idea and they just threw it to the wayside, because now it's like, well, this is the only Pokemon we're having in this game. And if that's strictly for a balancing issue, like if that's strictly for balancing, you literally solved it in Gen 7 with the Alola Dex. This is the only things that are allowed in Alolan formats because they're native to the Alola region. I don't know. I've been it's one of those hills that I keep doubling down on and would die on. I think that like the deck system from Sun and Moon was the proper way to handle like competitive EGC. Incineroar,
Tapu Fini, Kartana, Mega Kangaskhan, Bisharp, Mega Charizard, and more were all threatened to some degree by Virizion. Despite the good finish, Virizion didn't catch on and quickly faded back into the forest of obscurity. Ooh. Speaking of obscurity,
God, I hope Missing No wasn't in Gen 7. I don't remember Missing No from Gen 7. Probably happened. I don't remember. It's obviously a joke because he showed Missing No on the screen. Yeah, as it turns out, If you don't, you have hyper specialized Pokemon like Fluttermane that do very well in Scarlet and Violet. Why? Sure, it has like 35 HP, 35 attack, 35 special attack. But you know what it also has? Like screaming high special attack, special defense, and speed. It has just the right stats in just the right ways. It's allocated just the right way that it is an absolute monster. Yes, Fluttermane is like top 3 Pokemon for me. Like my top 3 are like Whimsicott, Fluttermane, and like Rayquaza. It's kind of strange. I'd be super Steel weak though. Oh my god, like Steel would absolutely just run me through. Anyways, moving on from that. Like, yeah, having it has something that realistically, like it gets close combat, Grassy Glide, X Scissor, Leaf Blade, Stone Edge. Like it gets good offensive moves. If its attack stat was better, I think it would have been fine. I mean, this version obviously released in Generation 5, Black and White. When we started to see a renaissance in regards to certain things, like there was as I declared, the like renaissance of bug type Pokemon. We had things like Excelgor, the bug type move, bug type actually mattered for a lot of things. Sure, we had things like Scissor and Fortress up until that point, but like Burmy, Wormadam, Caterpie, well, not necessarily Caterpie, like Butterfree, Beedrill, like bug typing was kind of just like relegated as like early game. This is how evolution works. Grats, you have evolved and worm into and flying insect. Cool. Yeah, things like Heracross exist, things like Scizor existed, right? But for all intents and purposes, the renaissance of bug typing would have been Gen 5. And just seeing where modern Pokemon really, in my opinion, starts to kind of take shape. It's interesting to look at. Having weakness to flying definitely hurts, especially when as many things as they do run around with Hurricane. Things are not necessarily running fly. You can see the odd fly. It depends on who's running what. But having that flying weakness kind of sucks. In regards to like going back one, Moltres, yeah, and like, you don't necessarily see Stealth Rocks in VGC, but any sort of like weakness to rock is gonna hurt. Once again, rock move, spread move, right? Trying to go back to its weaknesses. I mean, having the poison, bug, and flying weaknesses like Excelgor, you have to watch out for, especially as screaming fast as it is. Sure, at 108, Virizian's outspeeding Garchomp. But like, I mean, a lot of things run Poison Jab. You'll have the odd, like in Gen 7, we had Alolan Muck was running Gunk Shot, a lot of Gunk Shot or Poisonium Z's potentially. Bug, I mean, God, you have some good bug type coverage. Like, is it necessarily the most relevant thing? No. Does it exist and should you be worried about it? I would argue yes, especially if you run into like a good bug type Pokemon. I mean, things like Mega Beedrill, did they not exist as well in Gen 7, especially in certain formats? Like, I think Virizion, yeah, is just constantly overshadowed, even with the ability like Justified. Because I've definitely used beat up like Cobalion, right? I think that Cobalion and Terrakion are just much better. I think they have much better typing. I think their stat allocation is just that much better. I think they make much better use of things like Justified in regards to powering them up. Because yeah, you look at the stats and like, yeah, you would clearly need to like Swords Dance boost it, right? Swords Dance boost Virizion into doing anything. I think that there's just better value for that slot. Not that it's bad. It's just it doesn't do enough to justify itself over the competition.
Let's talk about our number 6 slot, Wo-Chen. Added in Scarlet and Violet, Wo-Chen is just sad. It's the 4th member of the Ruinous Quartet, which is probably what my violin quartet should have been named in 5th grade. But while each of the other members was metagame defining at some point during the first year of Scarlet and Violet's release, and Chen Pao even won Worlds, Wo-Chen has only been relevant because of this meme. Yeah. So what makes Wo-Chen so bad? Well, for starters, it's pretty much worse in every aspect than the other 3 treasures of Ruin. The typing is an easy place to start. Wo-Chen has 7 weaknesses, including a double weakness to Bug. And we already know that having a quadruple weakness is a big deal, but Bug is an especially bad type to be weak to. See, while Bug type Pokemon are the worst in the game, the Bug type move U-turn is both incredible.
This is like playing Yu-Gi-Oh, not expecting your opponent to have Ash Blossom. People will be running U-turn because U-turn just generates advantage. 70 base power bug type move, especially off of stab, to be able to do damage to further your game state, potentially pick up a knockout depending how low they are, and being able to freely swap. Yeah, U-turn's pretty good.
Strong and widely used. Pokemon like Urshifu and Rillaboom that Wo-Chen would otherwise do decently against suddenly can deal massive damage while also switching out. And that's not even to mention how bad it is to be weak to fairy and fire type moves. Yep. Offensively, Wo-Chen is a bit stronger. While Grass and Dark can
I'm sorry, you're weak to fairy type in Scarlet and Violet? with Fluttermane in format, nah, that's a certified GTFO moment.
Only hit 5 types for super effective damage. There's no single type in the game that can resist both. Of course, hitting things for neutral damage is a lot less impactful once we've seen the offensive stats Wo-Chen is working with. That's right, folks. They're almost exactly identical to Virizions, with 5 points being moved out of attack into special attack. Moving these 5 points around has about as much impact as posting an angry comment about how much you love Wo-Chen and it actually isn't bad and this YouTuber just doesn't know what he's talking about. In other words, not much. On the other,
you know, I was actually critical, I think, in the last reaction we did. I feel like he was being adversarial. But as it turns out, as I've had to do some pretty angry reactions recently and really like go into some really dumb criticism, I kind of dig it. It's kind of grown on me because, like, yeah, I think there's too much, like, I think there is a too much point of being adversarial or being antagonistic. But like at the same time, like, one, it can be done in this way, which is like humorous, right? But also, yeah, sometimes you need to put the rears and the screechers in their place. Like, I think he is coming from a point of like, yeah, this everything he said is fairly reasonable. Like, I think somebody mentioned in like one of the videos we reacted to of his, like, I think he missed one specific set for Baxcalibur or something. I'd have to look at the comment again. But like, in all fairness, like he covered like everything else. Like he covers a lot of information in a reasonable amount of time. Like, no, like he comes across as incredibly well read and researched. Like I will give him that.
And while Wo-Chen isn't super fast, it does have really tremendous bulk. Far superior to Virizion's actually. Not that it really helps. And that's for 2 reasons. One, Wo-Chen doesn't have the move pool to really benefit from sticking around. If it got Spore, Rage Powder, heck, even Sleep Powder, we could talk. But most of the utility Wo-Chen can provide is by using Ruination to cut.
Dude, I hate Scarlet and Violet for this. Just put fighting in water, just put it on the little buoy float thing. Oh my god, I forgot about that till just now. Thank you, Wolfey. Thank you for reminding me why Scarlet and Violet is an absolute shitpost. Oh my god, I should charge my Switch again. I gotta go figure out where I was at in VGC building.
A target's HP in half, and Ting Lu is better for this role anyway. The second reason is that Wo-Chen's typing really works against it. It has the bulk to stick around, but because it has so many common, devastating weaknesses, it ends up feeling a lot frailer than it actually is. If Wo-Chen were Grass and Steel type or Dark and Poison type, I think it could have been a top contender. But with its current typing, it really drew the short end of the stock. And then there's the ability. Wo-Chen got the worst ability of the quartet, the Tablets of Ruin, which is also another name for the iPads which are being used by toddlers. This ability reduces the attack stats of all their Pokemon on the field while it's in play. And it's not that this ability is bad, it's just nowhere near as good as the abilities given to the other ruinous beasts. Right. What you have to understand is that prior to Chen Pao, Chi Yu, and Ting Lu, there were no abilities that did anything like what they can do. If you wanted to lower your opponent's stats, you needed to use a move. Okay, there were some niche abilities like Battery and Power Spot that could power up your partners, but these were only given to really specific gimmicky Pokemon, not legendaries. Wo-Chen's ability, however, is different. See, one of the best and most common abilities in competitive Pokemon can lower your opponent's attack stats. Maybe you've heard of it before? Maybe you've seen this ability being used by a certain Pokemon? Maybe? The plus side of Intimidate is that it doesn't lower your own partner's attack stat, and also that the benefit can stick around even when the Intimidate user is off the field. While there is some value in the Tablets of Ruin that Intimidate can't provide.
How are they getting their frame rate so stable? I don't know why whenever I play Scarlet and Violet, it makes my eyes just like water. Like it really feels like maybe it's because I'm playing online. That might be it. I might be playing online rather than via local because it really feels like I lose frames. Like I would play more, but it makes me like physically sick to play with some of the engine isms. Maybe he's playing in docked mode. I don't know. This is a strange one. Am I just doing something wrong? Is there some settings you tick inside of your like in-game options menu? Like I'm desperate to know if I'm just missing something here.
Like against Pokemon where you either can't or don't want to lower their attack stats, it isn't enough to justify using Wo-Chen. Okay, now we're getting into the real.
Wow. Okay, he was already done with that. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean it's interesting to see how typing interacts with stat block as well, right? It has the bulk to stay around, but it doesn't have the typing to stay around. It has the typing to do damage, but it doesn't have the stat block to really do damage, right? So just becoming aggressively mediocre. I think in game design, though, you do need things that are mediocre, right? Like, take a game like Magic the Gathering, right? Like, or just any game realistically, right? Like, Magic the Gathering, you have, you know, your chase card, which is like, I don't know, 1 red mana, do like 5 damage, hypothetically, right? But you're also going to have like your common that is like 1 red mana, do 1 red damage, right? Like, you need, not every card needs to be a certified banger, right? You look at weapons in games, right? Like so let's say like a Call of Duty FPS status, right? Like, sure, you're going to have your absolutely just screaming fast SMG with fast rate of fire, and it is the de facto best weapon in its class, if not the game, right? But sometimes you're going to have that SMG that like feels like you put the bucket on your head and you're just eating like paint, right? Like, it functions, you may like it, but it does not have the objective performance that the metagame weapon has. Like, things are good. Like, meta's developed because there is an easier way to achieve the end goal. Easier, right? Like the ease of getting to your end goal is there, right? Incineroar is meta because it spreads Intimidate really, really well, and it is incredibly versatile, and it just works, right? Like, Landorus is meta because, man, it has just a great stat block, great offensive and, I would argue, defensive typing. It's able to just perform versus something like, I don't know, Stunfisk, right? Well, I'm not saying that Stunfisk is bad. I'm sure if you use Stunfisk and you like Stunfisk and you can use it to great effect in comp, like, sure, absolutely, not saying you can't, right? Like, metagames develop because, like, I don't know, something Choice Specs Kyogre clicking Water Spout just wins games easier than other things if your opponent cannot answer it, right? So I think that's interesting to look at. I think it's interesting to look at game design in regards to, like, yeah, this kind of got the short end of the stick in regards to the Ruinous Quartet, right? But I mean, it also makes the others shine all the brighter, does it not? I think it's interesting to consider.
Bad Pokemon. Before this point, every Pokemon had a niche. Now, was it a good niche? No, but each legendary Pokemon thus far has had something unique about it. For the Pokemon that follow, not only are they generally not very good Pokemon, they're for the most part inferior versions of other stronger Pokemon. Mesprit is our first example, coming in at number 5. Mesprit is a pure Psychic type Pokemon with the ability Levitate. And what's fun about that is that Mesprit is one of 4 pure Psychic type levitating legendary Pokemon introduced in Diamond and Pearl.
Didn't Azelf get like nasty plot? I don't remember what Uxie got. I think Uxie got something that is he Amnesia maybe? Like, I know Azelf saw some play. I know Uxie saw play. Cresselia definitely still sees play. There's VGC players who definitely are known for their Cresselia usage. Mesprit, yeah, I think is the odd one out here.
That's not even counting the 2 non-legendary Psychic type levitators added this gen either. Mesprit is one of the most unfortunate legendary Pokemon of all time because it is in almost every way just a worse version of Cresselia. See, almost all good Psychic type Pokemon fall into one of 2 categories. Sure. Support Pokemon or attacker. Supporting Psychic type Pokemon focus on their good natural bulk to offset their lack of resistances, and often use non-damaging moves to influence the battle.
This would be Hatterene. Hatterene would fall into this. In certain aspects, you could maybe even have a support Gardevoir set fall into this.
Offensive Psychic types instead try to overwhelm opponents with Psychic type damage, and often take advantage of secondary types or coverage moves to supplement their damage output.
Yeah, no, I could agree to this. Absolutely. Gen 1 Mewtwo definitely falls into that offensive category, especially because Amnesia boosted Special. Because remember, Special was one singular stat rather than Special Attack, Special Defense after Gen 1.
But Mesprit stats put it kind of in the middle of these 2 categories, which is a really bad thing. It has good bulk and respectable special attack, but it's not great in either dimension. But because it's relatively slow, it's forced to play as a supporting Pokemon rather than an offensive one. Keep in mind it isn't slow enough to work as a Trick Room attacker, but it's also not fast enough to do much outside of Trick Room either. But if you want a mid-speed support Psychic type Pokemon, you'd almost always prefer Cresselia, one of the greatest Pokemon of all time. All the moves Mesprit would want to use, like Trick Room, Helping Hand, and Skill Swap, Cresselia can use as well. And Cresselia's move pool is even deeper with great moves like Icy Wind. The only real advantage Mesprit has over Cresselia is its higher special attack stat. But because it's forced into using a support set, it's not worth the bulk you give up by using Mesprit instead of Cress. But our number 4 worst legendary Pokemon has a different issue compared to Mesprit.
I think that Mesprit's actually interesting to analyze. I think that while he could have gone deeper into like, you know, typing, I think he went as deep as he needed to. I think that it's pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, he kind of falls into this weird middle ground of not necessarily defensive, not necessarily the most offensive. Like it's kind of just in the, it's just aggressively mediocre. I think that that's a really good explanation of it. Yeah, because I don't think I've ever seen a competitive Mesprit. I don't think I have. I'm sure it exists. I'm sure people have tried, right? People try everything. Like, well, does Wolfey not bring Executor to events? Sometimes he performs with the Executor. Sometimes the Executor doesn't perform, right? Like, sometimes you just want to show up with, like, cool teams and do cool things, right? That's the part of why I'm getting back into VGC. That's the part of why I'm getting back into TCG even, right? Like, because Pokemon has just been a big part of my life for a number of years at this point. And it's just, my brain, I just have the brain for it. Like, I love it. I love the modularity of it.
It's not that another Pokemon does its job better. It's that whatever its job is, nobody wants to do it because it sucks. The number 4 slot goes to Regice.
Actually really surprising seeing that this is number 4 and not number 1. Yeah, as someone who's tried to look at Regice and try to figure out how to make it work, it is not as easy as you think it would.
Regice? I guess it's Regirock, Registeel, Regice. I'm going to say Regice. Regice is a pure ice type with the ability Clear Body, which prevents stat drops. While Clear Body is a great ability on certain Pokemon, its main use is to prevent attack drops from Intimidate and speed drops from Icy Wind, Electroweb, and Bulldoze. And as Regice is a slow special attacker, well, let's just say it's clear that any other ability would body this one.
My God, the puns, please.
Ice is the single worst defensive type in the game.
Actual, like, objective fact.
Sticking your Pokemon with 4 weaknesses in exchange for only a single resistance to ice, no less. This is a problem because Regice is obviously intended to be used as a bulky special attacker with its slow speed and incredible special defense stat. Regice is no slouch on the physical side either, being tanky enough, but of course it can't really make use of this good defensive spread because of how terrible ice is. Without resistances, Regice can't afford to take either powerful physical attacks or super effective special attacks. And the worst part is, even if it does make it through a turn unscathed, it can't do much to fire back. To ice back? Regice's special attack stat is shockingly low. Freezingly low? It's lower than Solosis and Glimmet. Look, I understand not wanting to make a Pokemon overpowered, but this is a legendary that we're talking about. It should at least be able to do some damage, right? To make
this almost feels like, I've talked about this previously on like Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff, where like old Yu-Gi-Oh design definitely nerfs things. Like look at like Crystal Beasts, right? Crystal Beasts are very aggressively like GX era, right? Like cards released nowadays, especially with things like V and Smith, right? Like it's just a different design philosophy. Thus having to go back and like hardcore correct things. Or you had like restrictions slapped on. You had like restrictions slapped on things like Rainbow Dragon. You have restrictions on like Yubel, which is really cool that the modern Yubel, like actual like support, actually works with it. You have like Samsara D Lotus that can actually come back from grave as the tribute if you have like Yubel Prime on field. Super cool, actually. I actually really enjoy it. Like, yes, I'm a Yubel fan. How could you tell? But I think that it definitely is like an older design mentality where like I think there was some reservations in holding back because things like Fluttermane, things like Zacian, I'm like, oh my God, I'm sorry, you designed what now? What is that speed stat on Zacian and Zacian Crowned? Excuse me? What does Dragapult do? Why is this just... I love that we did get Palkia, Dialga, and Giratina 2.0 in Sword and Shield. We got, for all intents and purposes, Dracovish, right? A water dragon type. Was it Dracovish? No, that doesn't sound right. What was Dracovish again? Oh my God, please no. Not like this. Not like this. I forgot what Fimsh is. What is Fimsh? He's water dragon, right? Yeah, he's water dragon. Wow, okay. Oof. Whew, I used this thing in Sword and Shield a lot, actually, more than I probably should have. Yeah, so we had Palkia, we had Dialga, which was our Chaladon, right? Which, I mean, to be fair, like, Duraludon. Our Chaladon is Scarlet and Violet, which for all intents and purposes, like, oh my god, that thing is actually just a legendary. Oh my god. And then we had Giratina 2.0 and Dragapult. It was really funny. Just like it's like referring to things in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, oh, that's just an Ash Blossom, or oh, that's just a Rhoda, reinforcement of the army, right? In Pokemon, we also refer to things as like, oh, yeah, that's just Dialga. What do you mean that's just Dialga? Yeah, he's just a Steel Dragon type. What do you want from me? Oh, that's just a Xerneas. What do you mean? It's just a bulky fairy type. What do you want from me? I shorthand way too many things.
Matters worse, Regice's move pool got the cold shoulder from Game Freak 2. Oh, okay, I knew I'd get there.
The puns.
While it learns a bunch of ice moves and a few electric moves too, that's just about it. And unlike the most recent Regi editions, Regice doesn't get a signature move of its own. The only good thing I can say about Regice is it might have hope for the future. With the change from Hail to Snow, Ice-type Pokemon got a major buff. So much so that we saw Articuno, a Pokemon that would have been on this list for sure if I'd made it 6 months ago, actually become a major threat. I think Regice has a lot less going for it than Articuno, but hey, you never know. Okay, before we get into...
I have to keep looking this up because I know people have explained to me, but I always forget what Snow actually does because I'm not used to the change. I haven't really played any sort of VGC in Quebec because once again, like the game just feels like it's running at like suboptimal frame rate. It makes my eyes bug out. Weather's adaptation to previous weather. Hail is basically just a lighter version of it. Snow no longer has damage over time, which makes sense. Instead, it boosts the defense of all ice types. All moves, items, abilities affected by hail now effect require snow instead. Okay, so instead of doing damage over time, right? Instead of damaging everyone every turn, which could be a double-edged sword, you just get a defense boost. So it's the opposite of sand, right? Because sand gives rock type specifically a special defense boost, 50% defense buff. Oh my god, that is broken. Well, I know what I'm building.
Our top 3 real garbage Pokemon, I want to do some honorable mentions.
Garbiter?
First, the Ultra Beasts.
Yeah.
I never knew this, but apparently these Pokemon are legendaries, and maybe this is my bias, they don't feel like legendaries to me, so I'm including them here rather than the main list. The worst Ultra Beasts by far are Guzzlord and Blacephalon.
Yeah, as someone who tried to make Guzzlord work, Guzzlord just doesn't. It don't. Blacephalon is also a sure, we had plenty of You'll Float 2 memes, don't get me wrong. It is a very it telegraphs hard. It's like it's Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, right? Like trying to like hit you. Like he telegraphs super hard. Like what is that Blacephalon gonna do? That Blacephalon's gonna do like this specific thing. I thought it saw some VGC competitive success, but like why would you run that over something like, I don't know, Xurkitree with Tail Glow? Man, I was super on that tech. I was so upset when Xurkitree no longer got Tail Glow going into Gen 8 and 9, right? Oh man, I was so sad that it didn't learn it anymore. Like they looked at that and were like, yeah, that was a mistake. But I missed the Ultra Beast. Kartana was pretty good. Man, everyone was teching fire for Kartana because Kartana was everywhere. My Alolan Muck was packing Fire Fang, I think, specifically for Kartana.
Nearly every other Ultra Beast had some usage at some point. These two were never good. On that note, Silvally. This is technically a legendary Pokemon, but it really doesn't feel that way, and also it's really bad. I almost brought Silvally to Worlds in 2017, and let me just say that I'm very glad that I didn't. You could actually make a case that Type Null is better than Silvally, but this isn't the place for that. Lastly, Enamorus Incarnate. This was the closest normal legendary to making it on my list, but ultimately I left it off because we've only had it for such a short amount of time that it would be unfair to judge it too soon.
Yeah.
And if it showed up in the right format at the right time, I think it could potentially be strong. All right, now we're into the top 3.
I know nothing about Enamorus. I still don't have it. I need to blitz through Legends Arceus.
And may I just say, these last legendary Pokemon are really bad. Like, you could forget that they're legendaries level of bad. So let's start out with number 3, Uxie. Uxie? I think it's Uxie. I don't know. I'm sorry. Don't yell at me. I think the biggest issue with what I've done as a YouTuber is that sometimes I used to pronounce things like Pokemon names wrong as a joke, but I think I'm also just naturally bad at pronouncing the names wrong. And so now when I do it wrong, people get mad at me because they think it's intentional. Like I said slacking because it's all, or no, I said slaking, because that's why I always called it when I was a kid. And then people got so mad at me because obviously I guess it's slacking, but I never knew. And people thought I was just like engagement farming, but I wasn't engagement farming. I'm just stupid. Anyway, I'm going to call it Uxie. And if it's wrong and it's obviously wrong, then I'm sorry, but I'm not doing it on purpose. I promise. Uxie
Dude, I feel that though. I feel that. Like I had somebody get super mad at me for like it's Rayquaza, not Rayquaza, and I'm like, nah, you're right. Like sure, I still say Rayquaza. Like I don't know. I have the excuse that I'm just dumb. Like I vibe with that excuse though. I say it because I'm dumb. I feel that. I respect that. I feel that on a deep and spiritual level.
Is just so unfortunate because everything wrong with Mesprit is wrong with Uxie, but it's worse. See, Uxie suffers from being Cresselia Jr. syndrome, but the case is even more severe than with Mesprit. And that's because while Mesprit and Uxie have near identical move pools, their stats differ. I told you that Mesprit was stuck between being a defensive supporting type and an offensive sweeper, right? Well, Uxie isn't stuck in the middle. It's very clearly intended to be the defensive member of the Lake Trio.
Right.
But let's compare Uxie's stats to Cresselia's. Yeah, Uxie's stats are almost strictly worse, and its move pool is also worse. Now, I should mention that I just showed you old Cresselia's stats. In Scarlet and Violet, it had both its defenses reduced by 10.
Yeah, that's the big one that I actually don't like. Because modern Pokemon has been doing a bunch of this. I mean, like, we've seen the change. We see changes throughout the generations, right? Like, Fire Red, Leaf Green. Like, if you look at Flamethrower in Gen 3, right? It's like 95 base power. It's now 90, right? We've had things like Draco Meteor. Didn't Draco Meteor used to be like 150? And now it's like 130? I think it's 130. Is it 130, 90? What is Draco Meteor? Google, tell me your secrets. Draco Meteor. Move. A lot of Pokemon learn it now, actually. Yeah, it's a 130-90. Yeah. Thank you, Pokemon DB, for covering me. Generations 4 to 5, Draco Meteor had a 140 base power, so now it's down to 130 as a 90. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, and even then, like, Aegislash, didn't Aegislash have changes and stuff? I think once we start buffing stats, I think that starts getting a little too egregious for me. It's kind of like in Yu-Gi-Oh, just ban the card. Just have Red Eyes, Darkness, Metal Dragon be banned. Just have Sinister Serpent be banned. Don't like, or Future Fusion, just have it be banned. Like, cement its mythical status. Don't, like, rework the effects. Like, it's like certain cards, like, didn't Crush Card Virus have, like, 4 reworks on how it worked? Like, 4 actual erratas? We're not going to talk about Necro Valley. Necro Valley is, Necro Valley is really funny to go through that progression, but it's not banned. Like, every time I think about Necro Valley erratas, it makes me laugh. Anyways, yeah, I don't know. The moment we start changing the core identity of something, I think that I start losing a little bit of interest. Because we are affecting the core experience of something. We're affecting the core identity of something. The original design philosophy intent, I think it's a little lost. That being said, I'm certain there's a number of Smogon players, competitive players, VGC players who are happy that it got its defenses reduced, as it's able to be dealt with a lot easier now. Like, I see both sides of the argument. My preference, my bias is I like preserving as much as possible the original design intent. Sure, if something becomes absolutely like not best in like best in slot for like everything, like certified Gen 1 Mewtwo status, like sure, we have a problem, right? Like if it is the de facto you run this or you don't play the game, sure, makes sense, right? Like I'm all for that. I'm all for things being best in slot for certain things, but not best in slot for everything. That's when you start running into like a tier 0 metagame problem. So I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on it. I actually didn't know about this nerf. They've been doing some stat adjustments in recent generations. I'm interested to see where they're going to go with it.
And while this does make Uxie look a little bit better by comparison, that's without considering the buff Cresselia received. Cresselia was given a signature move that heals both itself and its partner by a quarter of their max health, and then removes any status conditions. As you can imagine.
Oh. That's not a nerf, that's a rework. Ooh, that I have a little bit different thought process on that one.
Imagine this is a net buff to Cresselia, even factoring in the defense drops, and only furthers the gap between Cresselia and Uxie. There's really no reason to use Uxie over Cresselia, and that's part of the reason almost nobody has ever used it. The fact that they're from the same game also means that whenever Uxie is around, Cresselia is likely to be too, which would be Uxie's only hope to be in a game that Cress isn't. And unlike Regice, who has hope for the future, I'm not sure how much there is for Uxie. The main advantage of using a Pokemon like Uxie is the surprise factor. Your opponents won't be as experienced against it. But that's way less of a big deal in modern competitive Pokemon, where tournaments are best 2 out of 3, and we play a format called Open Team Sheet, where the moves, items, and abilities of our Pokemon are given to our opponents before the battle begins.
I'm sorry, what? that actual VGC policy now, that's kind of wild. Like, because I know you submit your deck list for inspection for like TCG, but it's not like you're submitting like, that's so strange to me, right? Because like, don't get me wrong, we don't have blind, we have team preview. We've had team preview for a few generations at this point. Is this actual? I don't think I heard that correctly. Is that actual VGC tournament document, like actual like policy? I noticed some frame rate drops here as well. So I think that definitely they're running into issues, especially with the close-ups.
C is the surprise factor. Your opponents won't be as experienced against it, but that's way less of a big deal in modern competitive Pokemon where tournaments are best 2 out of 3, and we play a format called Open Team Sheet, where the moves, items, and abilities of our Pokemon are given to our opponents before the battle begins.
That's so strange to me. Like, I even going through, like, hearing it again, that's so strange to me. Is this specific to, like, regionals and worlds? I guess that would make sense at higher up play, right? Like, but I thought that was the, like, core design intent. Like, sure, you have team preview, right? That way, you know, you can see a Zoroark coming from a mile away trying to masquerade as, you know, I don't know, like a Cresselia. That way, or as a Machamp, that way they try to use a psychic move and then it just completely nullifies it. Therefore, use your like whatever Night Days or Dark Pulse to try to get slow roll advantage, right? Like, sure, certain things got weakened because of team preview, but like I was not aware of Open Team Sheet. That's interesting to hear about. That changes the game completely because you know what to expect. It also allows you to. That's so strange to me. That is such a strange change. What's thoughts and consensus on it? Of those that have played with Open Team Sheet format, what are your criticisms of it?
If Uxie had shown up a generation earlier or Cresselia a generation later, things might have been different. But that's not the world we live in. At least Azelf escaped my list for now. Our number 2 worst.
That does technically run afoul of Terminal Montage. That does technically count as a re-upload via their Q&A. As I said, I've had to dive into that Patreon Q&A and look into that. Like, I think that I am somehow cracked down harder on Terminal Montage in what they've said than Terminal Montage does for their videos. That being said, it is WolfeyVGC. He probably has some sort of special permission from Terminal Montage, has never received a answer from them in regards to people using content. So I don't know. That one's a weird one.
Legendary Pokemon of all time is another Pokemon whose sibling we've already seen. Everybody welcome in Cobalion. This Iron Mountain Goat? What is Cobalion? It's the Iron Will Pokemon, which I assume is because you'd need an Iron Will and probably lead poisoning to ever want to use it.
Man, I wanted to use it in Sword and Shield, specifically Crown Tundra, because that's when it came out, right? Or that's when you could catch it in game. I wanted to use it in VGC. I had a beat up setup ready to go. No, I identify with that. You know, he's absolutely correct on this one.
Anyway, Cobalion is unbelievably terrible, which is messed up because they actually look like they tried with this one. Good typing, some good moves, and then just the dumbest stats you've ever seen. Walt, bring up Cobalion's attacking stats.
Oh my god, bro.
Yeah.
They did it again on 2 members of a trio. What do they have against these Pokemon? Why would they do this? Cobalion has really nice physical bulk, usable special bulk, and good speed. And then they gave it this 90 attack and special attack? I'm not even doing a comparison for this one. Y'all already know it's bad. Fighting and Steel are good coverage too because the fairy types that resist fighting are weak to Steel, and fighting hit the steel types that resist steel. Steel, steel, steel. Plus, you get 8 resistances and an immunity with only 3 weaknesses. Not that any of this matters, though. Pokemon need to be able to contribute when they're brought to a battle. And Cobalion doesn't have the offensive stats to be a damaging Pokemon, or the supporting moves to be a support. There was one brief moment during Sword and Shield where Cobalion was playable. It was used as a Dynamax attacker. You'd pair it with a fast beat-up Pokemon like Whimsicott to give it 4 attack boosts, and use Dynamax's increased power to boost its moves damage further. Max Steel Spike let Cobalion boost its team's defense stats, and the lack of a good spread move like Terrakion's Rock Slide didn't matter as much because all Dynamax moves only hit one Pokemon anyway. This strategy didn't ever really like catch on, and it also wasn't actually that good, but it is the only time that I can ever remember Cobalion being used. I don't think that there's any hope for Cobalion going forward, but they did at least give it a Paradox Pokemon that is stronger.
I actually didn't even. I forgot. No, I did remember this. I forgot it existed.
To think that they were trying to fix their mistakes from the past with Iron Crown. It's just too bad they didn't succeed with Iron Leaves. Sorry, Virizion. Which brings.
So before we get to number one, yeah, no, like the intent behind going with the Cobalion set in Gen 8 was to try to go in understanding that was going to be my max Pokemon, or at the very least, this was going to be a Pokemon that would be able to boost up with like Swords Dance, right? Like that was the intent behind it. Thus, understanding in retrospect, like, yeah, it is a flawed thought process, strictly because, God, I'm sorry, I've been talking for a while. I'm starting to phase out. Totally just like days out a little bit. Flawed thought process is because too many actions in a single tempo and my opponent could just knock me out, especially with some of those weaknesses, right? Like especially when I'm weak to Landorus, right? Like I would have to answer Landorus because I myself would just lose going in a 1-to-1 with Landorus, especially if I'm even if I go like Dynamax, right? Like that Earthquake is just gonna hurt. So yeah, no, it's interesting. It's interesting to remember that. Yeah, no, in Gen 8 I wanted to try to do things with Cobalion, beat up Cobalion, but yeah, good to know in hindsight that it just wasn't necessarily the play.
Brings us to the number one worst legendary Pokemon of all time. And while many of you probably have a Pokemon in mind for the number one slot, most of you are probably wrong. This Pokemon is so bad that almost everyone watching this video will have wiped it from their memory in order to preserve their sanity, but not me. I knew what I had to do. To remember a Pokemon that should never have been created, to bear witness to the crimes of Game Freak, to tell the world what they had done. I stared into the abyss, and Monkey Dory stared back.
Yeah.
Calling this thing a legendary feels like an insult to.
So at the beginning, when I said like Mewtwo or like Lugia, that was very specifically in reference to just other things outclassing them. Yeah, no, I had completely the wrong philosophy going into this. Yeah, no, this. Yeah, no, this sounds right.
Actual legendary Pokemon. I can't say a single good thing about Monkey Dory, so I guess let's go through the bad. First, typing. Are you serious? Poison and Psychic? Oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea for a legendary. Stupid Jimmy Neutron looking Pokemon. This combo doesn't have that many weaknesses or resistances, only hits 4 types for super effective damage, and can't damage steel types for even neutral. In other words, it doesn't interact with the other types all that much. And it is possible for a Pokemon like this to be really strong if it has incredible stats.
Right.
So why don't we take a look at Monkey Dory's stats? I cannot emphasize enough how abysmal this stat spread is. Think about it this way. Pokemon like Virizion and Cobalion are Pokemon that are bad almost entirely because they're lacking just one usable stat in their offenses, despite their other stats being across the board good. Monkey Dory has the opposite problem. It has one good stat with the rest being all around pretty terrible. First, the bulk. Monkey Dory is both very frail and doesn't have many resistances. And that means that you're going to be forced to run a defensive item on it almost always to ensure that it can actually stay on the field for more than one attack. It is fast, but not fast enough to justify its awful defensive spread. If this were Black and White or X and Y, Monkey Dory might be considered a fast Pokemon. But in Scarlet and Violet, half the Pokemon are track stars. And then we have its special attack, which is good, but not great. It has.
Remember, Flareon has a 130 base attack stat. Machamp also has a 130 base attack stat. Just putting stats into perspective. And yeah, no, there's a lot of fast Pokemon. Like Gen 7 was kind of a cooldown, right? Like Magic the Gathering Kamigawa block was a power down, right? Power down format. This effectively Gen 7 was a speed down format. Like a lot of things were slower. Then we get into Gen 8 with just screaming fast Zacian and Zamazenta. Oh my god, they were fast. Things like Dragapult, like we really cranked that dial up.
The same stat as Pokemon like Espeon, Gengar, Glaceon, Magnezone, Pokemon that are strong but not completely overpowered. It's weaker than Fluttermane, but also Pokemon like Poltegeist, which okay. If the other stats were better, this special attack would be totally fine. But given how bad everything else is, it's nowhere near high enough to be Monkey Dory's saving grace. What about the ability? Well, it's got 2 options. Toxic Chain, which might poison a foe when Monkey Dory damages it, and Frisk, which reveals the opponent's item. Toxic Chain is
actually Frisk does nothing in an open sheet format, right? Because if you know what your opponent has, you know what items they have. That is interesting that the format where you have your opponent's data sheet completely invalidates that ability. That is so interesting to me.
A really mediocre ability that's only useful on Pheasantipity, because it's bulky enough that it gets multiple chances for it to activate. On a
Right.
frail Pokemon like Monkey Dory, it's way worse. Not to mention that poison is the least impactful of all the status conditions. If this were freeze or sleep or even burn or paralysis, it could be different, but poison? Whatever. Of course, you could always use Frisk to find out the opponent's items. Except, remember I mentioned open team sheets before?
Yep.
Well, in official tournaments, items are one of the things that you know before the battle starts. In other words, Frisk is one of the worst abilities in the game because it does literally nothing. So I guess Monkey Dory has no choice except to use Toxic Chain. And then there's the moves. What a disaster. Monkey Dory clearly wants to be an offensive Pokemon, which is why it baffles me that they gave it two incredible supporting moves. Fake Out and Parting Shot are, moves that may seem a little familiar.
Incineroar intensifies.
But Monkey Dory is awful at using them. Fake Out stops the target from moving, but requires the user to switch out and in again in order to use the move again. And Parting Shot lowers the target's offensive stats and then switches the user out. Both these moves only shine when the Pokemon using them is tanky enough to switch in multiple times per battle, something we've established that Monkey Dory absolutely cannot do. Okay, well, what about its offensive moves? Well, it gets Psychic and Sludge Bomb, of course, and then, oh, that's like it. I guess
it.
if you want to hit Steel types, you can run Focus Blast, but
Focus Miss!
it's not like that's actually gonna work, huh? Okay, but there has to be something redeeming about Monkey Dory, right? Something I've been saving to give all the monkey heads watching this hope? Nope. That's why it's #1 on the list, baby. Bye-bye.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very compelling argument. I actually really like this video. I thought it was really cool. Thank you, WolfeyVGC, for another just excellent production. I had a lot of fun with this. Hopefully you did as well. Hopefully, if you are a Pokemon fan like myself, you found a lot of value in it. Hopefully, if you're like, oh yeah, I played Pokemon throughout the years, and you know, oh well, this, you know, being able to look at this again, or at least find something of value out of it, right? I had a lot of fun. I thought this was really cool. Appreciate everyone for watching. I know it's a pretty long one. I'm honestly really enjoying them, especially because I do really, really enjoy Pokemon. Thank you everyone for watching. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, Wolfey, for an amazing, just amazing production. I do also want to clarify in regards to the terminal montage comment. Look, at the end of the day, React content, not necessarily super popular, right? Especially when we have a number of people, number of channels who are rightly criticized for not adding anything transformative, right? I did my own due diligence, I did my own research, and I found in Terminal Montage's Patreon Q&A, no re-uploads, no unauthorized usage of their content without their permission, and I've done my best to signal boost it at this point. It should not be taken as an attack, disparagement, anything in regards to either Terminal Montage, anyone on their team, or WolfeyVGC or anyone they're in. Like, this is just what I found personally. Come to your own educated conclusion on that. Don't take it as any sort of attack, bullying, and or harassment. And thank you, Wolfey, for just honestly being super cool. It's been really cool to see your journey through Sun and Moon and into now. Production value has gotten a lot higher. You and your team to put out some amazing work. Can't wait to start getting back into VGC. Thank you everyone for watching. Have a good one.